Typical players spend up to 2 hours progressing through the interior spaces of the Northern Star Hotel, and we found in playtests that they often had trouble remembering their next goal of disrupting the Combine substation above. In earlier tests, the vault constantly reminded players of its presence by emitting a repeating abstract musical pattern. This pattern works so well at drawing and keeping the player's attention.
That was weird.
And the power's out. Looks like we're taking the stairs.
We knew from previous VR projects that players would expect a high level of fidelity from their interactions with objects in the world, and during early testing of Half-Life Alyx, we received comments that objects were not making the sounds that players expected, given an object's material, size, and assumed weight. This led us to a more granular approach to physics sounds than we had used in prior products. For example, in the past, we would have used a single physics sound for all objects of a certain size and material. So, we would have had one sound to represent collisions of small metal objects, another sound for large wooden objects, and so on. For Half-Life Alyx, we built up a new library of object-specific sounds so that we could distinguish between similar objects, like a piece of silverware and a small metal can. Not only do we now have a library of almost 2,000 object-specific physics sounds, covering over 160 different objects, but we can further alter the sound at runtime based on an object's impact velocity and the hardness of the material it collides with. In some cases, we even layer in sounds representing an object's contents, such as matches in a matchbox or fuel in a jerry can, which can be heard when those objects are shaken by the player or collide with something at high velocity.
Anything look like a breaker box in there?
Nah, I'm still looking. Ooh, breaker boxes. Let's go back to the elevator plan. I'm gonna get the power back on.
Given the large number of bottles throughout the game, and the fact that they feature so significantly in the distillery gameplay, we decided to make interacting with them as interesting as possible using a procedural liquid effect. Each bottle is assigned a random fill level, and values for the amount of liquid agitation and foaming are calculated based on the bottle's movement. This is stored in the object's tint colour, which is otherwise unused. The shader calculates the liquid level based on the bottle's orientation in game. Since the amount of liquid visible in a bottle as a proportion of its height is different when oriented upright, sideways or upside down, different values are used for each in order to preserve the apparent volume of liquid inside. The liquid's surface is then displaced by a number of sine waves, modulated with the agitation value to create rippling waves. The areas determined to contain liquid, as opposed to air, take on the colour and refraction index values of that liquid. Bubbles and foam effects are added based on the agitation and foaming values. These are procedural and can be modified to create a variety of different behaviours. Several layers of bubbles are created in a local view space relative to the object, so that they're stable from frame to frame, and can always move upwards relative to gravity. Artists can set a variety of parameters per liquid, such as colour, glow, foaming potential, wave properties, and a meniscus at the surface of the liquid which curls up around the edges of the volume, helping to communicate the viscosity of the liquid. The refracted environment seen through the glass and liquid is sampled from the same cubic environment map of the local area that's used for reflections, and so the bottles are effectively opaque and do not have to blend with the frame buffer in the way that transparent objects normally do. This was a strategic design choice, as along with storing the physics data in the tint colour, it means that the bottles can be rendered together as a batch in arbitrary order, which is critical for graphics throughput. In the end, the refractive liquid effect allows for a variety of interactions to take place at a fidelity that is especially compelling with tracked hand controllers in VR.
Here we go.
Hotel's ancient. The wiring's gonna be a real rat's nest.
Power's back on. Let's check the elevator. hear us. Name a song.
Flight of the Bumblebee.
Coming right up.
That's it.
Boom. Power back on. And up we... Looks like we're taking the ladder. This place is overgrown. How dangerous do we think this stuff really is?
Well, it is spores from another dimension, so probably... yeah, extremely. But a rare opportunity to examine alien flora up close.
The Zen flora in this area animate in response to the Vortigaunt energy pulsing from the Combine substation outside. Since the substation itself is not visible from inside the hotel, it was important that we continue to remind players of its presence using audio and visual cues, and the Zen flora provided a perfect opportunity to do this. The shaders used on the Zen flora help illustrate the plant's response to the energy pulses in a few different ways. For example, the villi and cilia elongate and vibrate, while many of the other plants pulsate or glow. The intensity and timing of these effects are driven directly by the sound system, meaning that the audio and visual reinforcement of the Combine substation pulses are always in sync.
Oh, careful of those pustule things. You're looking a bit ticked off the closer you get. Ah!
I'm really starting to think I shouldn't be breathing this stuff.
Agreed. Just keep moving. Maybe breathe less.
Ugh, this stuff reeks.
Oh, really? What does it reek like? Be specific.
Like a rotting animal mixed with ammonia.
Mixed with ammonia. Okay.
Breaching the quarantine zone revealed a new hidden secret of the city. Alien plant life from Zen has taken root on Earth and has been thriving in the shadows of City 17. On the development team, the Northern Star Hotel was referred to as Hotel Zen before it had a proper name in the story, as it was the first location we used to explore what Zen foliage could look like and how it might consume any given environment. One of the challenges the environment team faced when designing the Zen foliage was layering a new look onto an existing environment without having to rebuild Zen-infested versions of every prop. We relied heavily on texture blending and kit bashing of Zen foliage shapes to handle most of the big environmental changes when Zenifying a scene. We also added some new features to our level editor, Hammer, which allowed for more creative manipulation of assets to reduce repetition. For example, we could pose certain types of meshes such as the Zen tentacles. These could be placed, scaled, stretched and manipulated to snake through an environment, giving a handcrafted look without every asset having to be built for a specific location. These elements were editable in Hammer so they could be adjusted at any time, but were baked into static meshes when the map was compiled to improve their runtime performance.
that's not good.
Russell? Russell!
Alex, come in!
The Reviver, one of the new enemy types introduced in Half-Life Alyx, arose from our observation that playtesters enjoyed searching their environment in VR much more than they had in traditional games. In addition to rewarding that desire to search with ammunition and resin, we experimented with how it could be part of fighting an enemy. We began prototyping with a fast headcrab variant we called the Runner, modifying its behaviour to run away and hide from the player after it attacked. We found players really enjoyed looking for a small, hidden enemy they knew was somewhere within a dense environment. They also liked shooting at a fast-moving enemy that was able to run under and behind everyday objects like tables and chairs. Lastly, players talked about liking the way they got to be the aggressor in combat for once, since everywhere else in the game they felt like they were always on the defensive. While feedback was overall very positive, there was one specific problem: how to encourage players to search for the Runner. After a few Runner encounters, we found players would start to realise they didn't have to look for the Runner at all, they could simply wait for it to run away and then leave the room. So we started prototyping various ways in which the Runner could become more dangerous if not found, setting up a time pressure where players had to find the Runner quickly or the situation would get worse. After some experimentation, we landed on the prototype where the Runner could revive a fallen zombie and become a new kind of foe, one that was more dangerous than a Runner or zombie. After this change, the Runner was renamed internally to the Reviver, and we began assembling the various encounters around it. It took a lot of playtesting to balance out all the various elements of the Reviver fights, because they involved multiple separate stages: combat versus the Reviver, searching for a hidden Reviver, and combat versus a revived zombie. In the end, we still didn't feel like we'd created enough of a foolproof reason for players to need to search for hidden revivers, so we turned the Reviver's heart into a key, requiring players to collect it.
Alex, what happened?
There was like a dog-looking lightning thing.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
4 shells left. Hey, Russell. This thing fell out of the dog.
Ah, look at that. Huh, interesting.
An enemy's animation can elicit a powerful emotional response from players, especially in VR. While developing the Reviver, we learned that sometimes a character performance can have unintended consequences. In our initial Reviver prototypes, we simply used a blue-tinted headcrab model with rudimentary electrical effects. The prototype was successful enough in playtesting that we decided to invest in a new, purpose-built model for the Reviver, with electrical skin and improved effects. Players identified the new Reviver successfully in the game, but we ran into a new problem. Players didn't want to fight it anymore. While the blue headcrab was easily identified as something dangerous, the new model was something that players had to evaluate from scratch, and they didn't necessarily see it as threatening. In fact, the animations authored for the new Reviver model were interpreted by many players as friendly or even cute. Players would often approach the creature to try to pet it, or worse, refuse to kill it to retrieve the required puzzle piece, blocking their progression in the game. If they did then realize that they were going to have to kill the cute creature to proceed, they felt horrible having to go through with it. To fix this, we reauthored most of the Reviver's animations, making it significantly more unsettling and menacing. We also made the Reviver more aggressive by adding a jump attack if the player got too close. With these changes to animation and behavior, players once again were fighting the Reviver as intended, and they no longer wanted to take it home as a pet.
This is the room featured in the very first shot of the Half-Life Alyx announcement trailer. It's not an obvious choice for that use. The room is dark, not particularly colorful, and it's a pretty pedestrian corridor. Cleaning supplies and laundry baskets are not in themselves attention grabbers. But we chose this scenario because it very effectively demonstrates the excitement and tension that we thought was typical of the game. All game trailers require careful design. Conveying a game's core experience in just a few moments is tricky, even at the best of times. But we believe the Half-Life Alyx trailer had to work harder than most to meet a particularly difficult and uncommon set of challenges. We had kept the existence of the game under wraps, so shipping the trailer was going to be the first time in 13 years that Valve had shown any work on Half-Life. On top of that, the trailer had to quickly communicate that Valve had chosen to make the next installment of Half-Life a VR game. And although we were very confident in the decision to make a VR game and in the quality of what we had built, we still worried that revealing those decisions to the world might cause even our most loyal fans to make their own decision, that we had truly lost our minds. Those of us working on the trailer knew it had to make people so excited that they could put those worries aside. The trailer also had to clearly convey that the game was not Half-Life 3, meaning that it did not take place after the events of Episode 2. Half-Life Alyx was, instead, a prequel of sorts, occurring between the events of Half-Life and Half-Life 2. In addition, the trailer had to show depth, variety, familiar characters, and enough novelty and surprise to get across to the viewer that this was really and truly a full-fledged installment in the Half-Life series, not a small VR experiment or a spin-off. This was a tall order, but the entire game team rallied around the effort because everyone understood the value of the work. We're just as proud of the result we achieved in the trailer as we are of any other part of Half-Life Alyx. This is the room featured in the very first shot of the Half-Life Alyx announcement trailer. It's not an obvious choice for that use. The room is dark, not particularly colorful, and it's a pretty...
There it is. That elevator will take me up to the substation.
Half-Life Alyx supports 3 types of player movement: continuous movement, shift teleport, and blink teleport. Early on, one of the properties of blink teleport, and to a lesser degree shift teleport, was that players would often refer to the actual mechanic of teleporting when describing their movement through the environment. I teleported to the desk, or I teleported into cover, was often how players would describe their actions, and it served as an unconscious reminder that they were interacting with a game in a specific way. To address this, we made a couple of key changes early on that significantly altered the way players recounted their movement, and as a result, pulled them further into a more convincing virtual reality. One of these changes was the visual indicator that represented the teleport destination. We swapped that abstract cylindrical indicator used in the lab for a pair of holographic feet. The feet helped provide a sense of physical presence and indicated the direction the player would face upon finishing a teleport. We also added animated feet between the player's current location and the teleport target. These feet illustrated the path the player would traverse, further helping provide a fiction for their movement through the environment. Along with the visual interface changes, we also added audio of footsteps and body movements that would play after a teleport to effectively summarize the player's movement through the space. This isn't something everyone necessarily notices at first, but it is quite obvious when it's missing or incorrect. The footstep audio transformed how players described their movement through the world, and players would often refer back to movement in the environment as walking or running, as opposed to referring to game terminology.
Last 4. Oh, crap! Lightning dog.
Be careful, Alex.
Oh my god, I went into a guy. Russell?
Alex, you still there? Dog gone? What happened?
New development? It went into a dead guy.
No!
Yes. I had to shoot both of them. It was nuts, Russell.
It sounds nuts!
Oh, it was.
One of the challenges with the Reviver's resurrection mechanic was training players that the Reviver was the target, and the zombie was effectively just an inert vehicle that could not be damaged. This was a significant departure from what we had been training players to expect. Up until this point in the game, players would see a zombie, shoot at it, and as long as they hit it enough times, it would die. The Reviver breaks that expectation, And in early tests, players thought the game was broken when the zombie wouldn't die or even react to being shot. We had to make a number of changes to revive zombies to train players that this behavior was intentional. First, we designed the revived zombies' introduction animation to use particle effects and audio to draw attention to the changes that result in this new type of combat. Second, we substituted in dull particle and impact sounds to make shooting the zombie feel less impactful than it did in previous encounters with ordinary non-revived zombies. And finally, we modified the revived zombie so that it doesn't play any flinch animation or respond to bullet impacts, further communicating to players that its behavior is different. We also used the reviver itself to illustrate the new combat experience. Electrical effects were added to indicate the reviver's movement inside the zombie, with a bright pop and glow as it emerged at a new location on the zombie's body. With these new visuals and satisfying impact sounds and screeches from the reviver when hit, playtesters were no longer confused and consistently enjoyed the new combat mechanic.
Compared to our traditional first-person experiences, in VR we found it was sometimes all too easy to create an intense atmosphere. This can be to the game's advantage, but it can also be detrimental in cases where our focus is on training players in some new mechanic. In intense situations, players frequently fail to notice or retain critical information, and as a result, we often had to reduce tension in areas of the game where we were introducing players to something new. The audio of the reviver here as the player descends beneath the hotel is designed to ease players into the idea that they will be encountering the creature that they had briefly seen as they entered the hotel earlier. The reviver's scream and its shadow on the wall are designed to reduce tension by indicating the position of the reviver around the corner, removing any potential surprise. Telegraphing the reviver's position and giving players the upper hand helps set up the resurrection scene, where players want to observe the reviver instead of shooting at it immediately. This is critical because this is the first time the player sees the reviver reanimating a zombie, and if players are too distracted to take it in, they won't be successful in the upcoming fight.
In our early designs, a revived zombie was just an invincible zombie with a moving vulnerable spot. Playtesting revealed this to be less tense and threatening than the reviver on its own, and since we wanted the revived zombie to be a higher stakes adversary, we needed to enhance its offensive capabilities. As a natural extension of the electrified nature of the reviver, we chose to create an electrical field around the revived zombie, so that players who got too close would take heavy electrical damage. This worked well for many playtests, until we observed a player who was a proficient real-world marksman. This player was able to easily defeat the revived zombie without ever being threatened by it. In response, we gave the revived zombie its electrified ground counterattack, which forces players to change positions to avoid damage. This created a cadence of attack and retreat that was more tense and satisfying for all players.
Since a VR game must always be rendered from a virtual camera that matches the player's own point of view, we have limited opportunities to control what the player sees. Elevators are one of the few tools we have in VR to direct the player's view. A rising elevator like this one can be used similar to a crane shot that you might see in film, going from one elevation to another, revealing a beautiful vista or dramatic story beat. In VR, elevator rides can be challenging to make comfortable, as the motion of the virtual elevator is inconsistent with the player's own vestibular system. We found that we can make the elevator rides in Half-Life Alyx comfortable enough for most players by moving the elevator slowly and limiting how much the player could see out of the elevator. This particular elevator was initially far more open, but we gradually introduced more and more visual obstruction to the design so that the player always had some significant portion of the elevator in their field of view. This meant that we were able to get the dramatic reveal of the hotel exterior and Combine substation we desired, but players were comfortable since they could always see the elevator, which was in their own frame of reference.
Not to be a worrier, but shouldn't Dad be back by now?
Well, let's think about it, Alyx. He's on foot, moving at 3 miles an hour. Plus, he's a fugitive. He's only got one leg. There's obstacles, no direct path. You know what? I'm not going to lie to you. He should be back by now.
Yeah. So I should be worried.
Normally, yes. But you're the one headed towards the danger, so I'd say we should be the ones worried about you.
After exiting the elevator, the player gets their closest view yet of the Combine substation attached to the exterior of the hotel. While the Combine architecture can veer into the abstract, it's often at its most successful when contrasted with a human structure. Beyond this, we always try to drive the visual design with an invented function, ideally to support the gameplay or story. In this case, the routing of some unusual power source to the vault from various parts of the city. The player doesn't know it at this point, but this substation is designed to essentially torture the song out of a group of Vortigaunts who are housed in the attached pod farms. The output is collected from the Vortigaunts before being reharmonized by a single conductor Vortigaunt via the cable tuner apparatus seen at the root of the transmission cables that run up to the vault itself. This design gave us the opportunity to subsequently meet another Vortigaunt, and acted as enough of a constraint to allow us to design an interaction that would physically compromise the substation as the player exits the hotel in the next map.
almost got it. Oh, that should come in handy.
I don't have enough resin for any of this stuff.
Ah, well, you know what they say about resin, Alyx.
No, what do they say about resin, Russ?
Look for more resin.
Okay. I'll keep an eye out.
Yeah, that's the one. Look for more resin.
Uh-oh. This guy's not wearing a shirt.
Zen foliage has been designed to respond to the player in a number of ways. In dark areas, where the flashlight is active, some Zen flora will animate or expand in response to the light. These Zen plants respond to the proximity of the player's hand by glowing and pulsing. The glow effect in particular is rendered with an offset using the correct binocular perspective for each eye, which gives the impression that the glow originates in the interior of the organism. The Zen flora's shader effects, which rely on hand proximity, take their input from a dynamic voxel field which follows the player at all times. The player's hands effectively draw motion trails in this voxel field, which can be sampled by the foliage's shaders to drive deformations and other shading effects. If the player moves their hands quickly, they produce motion trails in the voxel field. If they hold their hands still, they produce a radiating force. These different types of motion characteristics allow us to create different behaviors in the foliage to give it a bit of extra personality.
Particle effects present an interesting challenge in VR due to stereopsis, which is our ability to discern the depth of objects from two slightly different views of the world we see from our two eyes. Traditional particle systems, as seen on the left, were typically implemented as a series of flipbook images displayed on relatively large polygons, which orient to face the player. Each series of images would contain effectively a little movie of a more complex phenomenon like a wafting puff of smoke or a flickering flame and so on. For the monoscopic rendering used in non-VR systems, this approach holds up well and is widely used across the industry. Because of the stereo rendering used in VR, however, players can easily see the flat cards resulting in the unconvincing effect seen on the left. To address this, we had to update our particle rendering techniques for VR. The particle system on the right is an updated VR-friendly version of the older effect seen on the left. One technique we used on large cards, like the ones used in this smoke effect, was to create some drag on the card's reaction to the player's head movement. To do this, we created another particle system which lagged the player's position and was used as a player camera for the facing direction of the smoke cards. By removing this one-to-one relationship of head motion to sprite rotation, we were able to give the impression that the smoke effect was volumetric. In addition to using more 3D elements in the creation of our effects, we also often use the post-processing bloom on particles to help visually merge elements that otherwise would appear as a set of flat planes. This made the cards harder to stereo fuse, which gave them a more diffuse volumetric feel.
One of the tenets of Half-Life game design is creating crafted, moment-to-moment experiences that players participate in as they progress through the game. Sometimes this means playing with emotional responses to turn something undesirable into a memorable highlight. This collapsed section of the hotel features this type of experience. Players are often instinctively pulled to the safest looking location in a given area, and here that would be the well-lit corridor above. But when they get there, they find their way blocked by a Combine power shield. The power cable to shut down the Combine force field leads them back down into the poison headcrab-infested darkness below, a place they really didn't want to go. These larger gameplay spaces also need to be resilient to player choice. So even if a player chooses not to head up to the well-lit corridor, they likely will still have the same trepidation about heading down into the darkness below. After the player has braved the darkness and sheltered themselves in the lit room where they're safe from the wandering headcrabs, they're faced with the daunting task of cutting the power to the Combine force field, because this has the side effect of plunging the area into darkness. Not only does that make the situation worse, since the player must make their way out of the pitch blackness with only a flashlight, but the path to the exit is back through all the poison headcrabs. We spent a lot of time tuning this experience through careful playtesting and evaluation, and often, when recounting their travels through the hotel in post-playtest discussions, players would recall this moment of being plunged into darkness as a high point, managing to combine a feeling of amusement with the overall sense of dread.
Combine shield blocking your path.
I'll figure out how to shut it down.
Alyx, it's your lucky day. That Combine weapon's unbonded.
How are you sure?
It's still in the case. They never leave them in the case.
Nice.
I didn't even need to edit your genetic code.
I know. We'd love that.
That's okay. There'll be a next time.
One. Last one. Oh, man.
A common game design problem is that of resource placement, and this spot in the game is a good example. Players have just left an area where they acquired the Combine submachine gun, and whenever they get a new weapon, we try to give the player the opportunity to experiment with it right away. So, right after the SMG, we make sure to give the player a bunch of ammo for it and a supply of not too threatening enemies, in the form of confined zombies and wandering headcrabs to experiment on. But playtesting has shown us that there's a wide range of ways that players respond to that setup. Some shoot a headcrab or two and move on, but some players take their time exploring the weapon, even using up all the ammunition we gave them. Now, after the headcrabs, the player is heading towards a new area, which features one of the hardest combat arenas in the game, where they must fight 2 revivers at the same time. How much ammunition can we expect the player to have here? How much should we put in this area between the 2 arenas to ensure all players will have enough to fight the 2 revivers? If we don't put in enough, player may be in a position where they cannot succeed at the upcoming encounter, and reloading their save games won't help them. They will need to go back and replay the previous area, this time conserving more ammo. That's not something we want to happen, nor is it something that we can expect all players to realize. Instead, many will repeatedly try and fail to be the 2 revivers. So, at its core, the problem with resource placement is that the dynamic range of resources carried by players can be significant, and it gets even wider as the game progresses. In Half-Life Alyx, we would see some players end the game with barely any ammunition, while other players had over 1,000 unused rounds.
So how can we handle resource placement when there's such a wide dynamic range in player collection and usage patterns? Like many games, we opted for a dynamic system that looks at the player's current resource counts and makes decisions based on them. But the design of these kinds of systems can be tricky, because they tend to affect player behavior. For instance, in Half-Life 2, we placed breakable crates throughout the game which dynamically spawned resources based on the player's current health and ammo levels. This had the advantage of allowing us to not need a huge amount of playtesting for resource balancing, because as long as there were enough crates around, the player would always have enough resources. But because that system exists, we didn't have to spend much time on resource placement, and as a result, we didn't really craft challenges around resource collection. Players also learned that they didn't need to really care about the resource levels, because the crates were always going to top them up on whatever they needed most. For Half-Life Alyx, we wanted to revisit those assumptions. We knew that searching for resources in a VR environment was something players really enjoyed. So we wanted resource collection to be something players needed to do throughout the entire game. And that meant we didn't want them to ever reach the point where they had so much ammo and health that they didn't need to explore. We were also able to start playtesting earlier in the product development cycle than we had been able to when making Half-Life 2, which gave us the confidence that we'd be able to spend the time we needed to carefully place every resource.
Those Combine shield doors are effectively
For Half-Life Alyx, we moved to a system that allowed us to craft a more specific experience, using a dynamic layer that attempts to reduce the dynamic range of resource gathering between players. Instead of placing generic resources that switch types, level designers carefully placed each resource type throughout the world. Some are easy to find, and some are more difficult. Then, as the player moves forward in the world, the system opportunistically removes resources in the path ahead
based on the player's current resource levels. This had the benefit of allowing level designers to have a lot of control over the player's resource amounts in different areas of the game. They were able to craft areas where they wanted the player to be starved of one ammo type or encouraged to use another. For example, in this area, designers could provide enough ammo to ensure that the player would have enough to fight 2 revivers, with the knowledge that the ammo balancing system would remove much of it if the player was already loaded up. We could safely give the players a large amount of Combine SMG ammo in the previous arena, and know that the players who ran past the poison head crabs without firing a shot wouldn't find more here. There are a number of additional features to address complexities that result from this system, such as ensuring players always find something inside a Combine locker, or ensuring that players are still rewarded for searching carefully and regularly, even if they're carrying a lot of ammo. Ultimately, we want a player who is paying more attention to the environment to come out ahead resource-wise. We just needed some dials to be able to control how far ahead they got.
Up until this point, each Reviver encounter has been focused on teaching players something new about the Reviver so that they can defeat it. This arena represents the culmination of the training. There are no new rules, there is nothing to learn about the Reviver itself. By this point, players are armed with the knowledge required to progress. The challenge then shifts into a combat problem where strategy and execution are required. Players have to juggle and prioritize multiple targets, utilize all of their weapons, and manage a constrained supply of ammunition in order to prevail and make their way back out to the exterior of the hotel so they can deactivate the combined substation.
Okay, made quick work of that.
so. Yeah, this one was kind of rough.
You're all right, though, right?
Yeah, Russ. I'm good.
Well, we've got to get you out of here and up to the roof.
I'm working on it. Blast cell. All right, here it is.
Now just snip those cables and off we go.
One of the core subplots of the storyline is regarding the Combine imprisonment and use of the Vortigaunts to trap the G-Man. The multidimensional power of the Vortigaunts to detain the seemingly invincible G-Man is established in previous Half-Life lore. Through the use of their prisoner pods and substation technology, the Combine extract the power of the Vortigaunts' Vortessence chant, tune that energy, and then transmit it to the vault to contain the G-Man. To communicate this Combine process to the player without explaining it through lengthy exposition, we used musical sound patterns to represent the process implicitly. If you stand near the pods holding the Vortigaunts, you can hear them groaning their chant in a slow but semi-musical pattern. Just past the pods is the resonator, within which you can hear a distilled version of the chant energy. Finally, the cables are activated with the concentrated Vortigaunt energy, which is harmonized in varying patterns and intermittently transmitted to the vault once the energy is sufficiently tuned. If you stand near the cables while they're tuning, you'll notice the sheer size and height of the sound. This was achieved by placing the sound emitters for each cable at the locations of the actual cables themselves. The sound of the cables covers a broad frequency range, which emphasizes Steam Audio's head-related transfer function processing. That simulation, combined with the feedback of the observer's inner ear as she looks upwards, gives the same impression of scale that VR is known to give visual objects.
Character performance within a VR game has a unique set of opportunities and challenges. In our efforts to keep control in the hands of the player, we must create a performance that is interesting enough to maintain players' attention, but flexible enough to allow for player freedom. This scene has the most face-to-face interaction in the game, and there is no physical barrier between the player and the Vortigaunt when he first appears. At one point, we played with the idea of a jump scare when the Vortigaunt is released, upending the player's expectations of what had been referred to only as a battery up until that point. Not only was it a bit ham-fisted, but the Vortigaunt came flailing out of the pod, frequently into the same space occupied by the player. To solve this problem, we cut the jump scare and slid the pod back out of the player's space as it opened, to allow for the Vortigaunt to emerge at a comfortable distance. We faced a similar challenge when determining how to get both the player and Vortigaunt to their next locations without intersecting. We wanted to get the player and Vortigaunt side by side overlooking the vista, while the Vortigaunt delivered critical exposition. It would have been awkward for the player and Vortigaunt to take the same route along the catwalk, so we looked at other options, including exploring ways that the Vortigaunt may have once moved in its native environment. With long forearms, it's feasible that the Vortigaunts may have moved around as quadrupeds, so we chose an agile four-legged scramble up to the higher platform where he can deliver exposition without contending with the player for space.
This isn't going to be as easy as it looked from the ground. I don't see any way to disconnect the cables in here.
Now go inside and deactivate the power source. Good grief, it's a Vortigaunt.
We have been trapped in the dark.
You're free now. It's okay. Your friend sent me.
The Alyx Vance. You are our friend.
What are they doing to you here?
What they do to us all. The Combine drain from us the power they use to protect their weapon. There. We are ripped from ourselves.
We have to stop them from killing your friends.
The Vortigaunt will extract ourselves and exact our own vengeance. You must go to the weapon.
Well, I can't get into the vault if the substations are still online.
Do not worry, Alyx Vance. They will not be. We will not allow it. I will clear the path. Our paths diverge. But remember, there is no distance between us. We are conterminous.
Thanks. Good luck.
A lot of trust in that Vortigaunt to shut down all the substations.
I trust him.
Yes, me too. Because if he doesn't, well, that vault isn't going anywhere, and we'll be standing there with no vault to break into, surrounded by Combine.
Russ, trusting him is our only plan here. He'll do this. We can do this.
Yes, you're right. He'll be fine. We're all going to be fine.
conditions. Please cooperate with ground protection team. Ground protection.
What do you think, Russ? Guess we better cooperate.
Yeah, sounds like she means business.
We had a good run.
Cooperate.
While developing Half-Life Alyx, we had a large number of people in many disciplines contributing to a relatively small number of maps. This meant that we frequently had multiple people working on the same map at the same time. One way that we managed this complexity was to break our maps into smaller pieces referred to as prefabs. A prefab could be built out of the same types of geometry, logic, enemies, particle systems, or any other elements as a regular map. As long as people were working in separate prefabs, they could make changes or additions without stepping on each other's work. A prefab could contain a large physical space like this whole street scene, or it could contain only a handful of elements. Large prefabs that partitioned a map to allow for collaboration were essential for a project of this scope. But many small, reusable prefabs were created for Half-Life Alyx as well. A good example of this was the set of reusable vehicle prefabs used here and throughout the game. Each vehicle was authored as a configurable prefab, enabling designers to quickly place them around the game, setting a few parameters to customize the vehicle for the context. Parameters include things like the vehicle's paint color, the amount of pre-existing damage, whether the doors were open or simply missing, and the type of ammunition or other resources the vehicle might contain. This sped up our workflow and also meant that updates to a prefab were automatically propagated out to all of the maps that used it.
The tarps used by the Combine to cover buildings in the quarantine zone are animated procedurally. This animation was added relatively late in development, so it needed to be both computationally inexpensive and technologically conservative, so no new systems. Simple overlapping waveforms are used to displace the tarp geometry where it hangs loosely away from the building. The displacements are oriented along the wind direction, and their propagation direction is further modified by the gradients of a texture we refer to as a freedom of motion map. This map is derived from the shape of the building geometry under the tarp, and is used to attenuate the displacement so that the tarp won't animate in places where it is meant to be pulled tight against the building. The result is a flapping tarp that seems to conform to its surroundings and responds appropriately to the wind.
The Combine soldier you see here won't fight you. It's been programmed to run back and forth along the path shown on the ground in order to illustrate the stride retargeting system developed for Half-Life Alyx. One of the challenges of animating digital characters is making sure that their feet don't slide along the ground as they move. Humans are very good at picking out irregularities in the movements of virtual characters, especially in VR, and Combine soldiers in particular need to look like their feet are planting and their weight is shifting as they change direction. Otherwise, they appear weightless and unconvincing. In a pre-processing phase, our stride retargeting system analyzes the steps of each authored animation and stores them as a direction-independent trajectory. At runtime, our system predicts where each foot will land on the next step based on the motion of the animation, the character's path, and the height of the ground. The pairs of colored boxes on the ground illustrate this process. The red boxes show the previous foot positions, the green boxes indicate the soldier's current foot position, and the blue boxes are drawn where each foot is predicted to land next. Once the predicted foot positions are calculated, the system guides the feet to the predicted locations using the trajectory information to preserve the style of the original animation. Once the foot lands, it is locked in place until the next step. In the end, this system was so effective that we could essentially make any animation walk in any direction without foot sliding. You can experiment with the system by moving around the area, since the soldier has been set up to always face you while running the specified path. The Combine soldier you see here won't fight you. It's been programmed to run back and forth along the path shown on the ground in order to illustrate the stride retargeting system developed for Half-Life Alyx. One of the challenges of animating digital characters is making sure that their feet don't slide along the ground as they move. Humans are very good at picking out irregularities in the movements of virtual characters, especially in VR, and Combine soldiers in particular need to look like their feet are planting and their weight is shifting as they change direction. Otherwise, they appear weightless and unconvincing. In a pre-processing phase, our stride retargeting system analyzes the steps of each authored animation and stores them as a direction-independent trajectory. At runtime, our system predicts where each foot will land on the next step based on the motion of the animation, the character's path, and the height of the ground. The pairs of colored boxes on the ground illustrate this process. The red boxes show the previous foot positions, the green boxes indicate the soldier's current foot position, and the blue boxes are drawn where each foot is predicted to land next. Once the predicted foot positions are calculated, the system guides the feet to the predicted locations using the trajectory information to preserve the style of the original animation. Once the foot lands, it is locked in place until the next step. In the end, this system was so effective that we could essentially make any animation walk in any direction without foot sliding. You can experiment with the system by moving around the area, since the soldier has been set up to always face you while running the specified path.
Combine do know how to upgrade a gun, I'll give them that.
Last cell. Getting kind of crowded down here, Russ.
Com channel's gone crazy since we took out that substation. They know we're after the vault now. Whatever's in there, they really, really don't want us to have it.
Well, now I just want it more.
Now that's the spirit. Steady.
Trip mines have appeared in prior Half-Life games, and the act of defusing them seemed like a natural fit for a VR game, where players can perform complex operations with their hands. By this point in the game, players have already learned how to hack Combine technology with their multi-tool, but we wanted defusing a trip mine to be more tense than the hacking puzzles. To defuse a trip mine, not only does the player have to place their hand near the laser that could trigger the mine, but they have to perform the task within just a few seconds. Early versions of this puzzle were inspired by lockpicking, resembling a series of tumblers that the player had to quickly align. Unfortunately, the tumbler design required players to rotate their wrists in an uncomfortable manner, particularly given that they had to also avoid touching the laser beam. We removed the rotational component but kept the timing element, leading to the mechanic you see in the final game. We also experimented with causing the trip mines to actually explode if the player failed to defuse them, but most players found this too punishing, especially in cases where a chain reaction of explosions could occur. Instead, the mines just stay active and the player can attempt to defuse them again. We did end up keeping this behavior for the hard difficulty setting, but added a warning sound a few seconds before the mine actually explodes, to give players some time to move away. We also experimented with allowing defused mines to be removed and redeployed by the player, but we hadn't designed enough combat scenarios around this mechanic for it to be satisfying in practice, so this was left out of the final game.
This combat arena that loops back over itself as the player winds through the tenement buildings was one of the earliest test maps built when we began adding Combine soldiers to Half-Life Alyx. One of the lessons we learned from this series of combat encounters was that fighting Combine soldiers was physically taxing on players as we needed to pay careful attention to pacing. Taking cover, reloading, switching weapons, and acquiring targets really pushed on all the skills that players had learned up until this point. To help cut down on fatigue, we added gaps between the Combine encounters and removed some of the combat altogether to better pace the experience. The trip mines in the stairwell following this battle are a good example of one of the pacing elements we used to slow the player down and let them recuperate before the combat ramps back up again.
Russ, are they saying my name?
Yeah, that's not good.
It was an interesting challenge for artists and level designers to employ environmental storytelling to paint a picture of what may have happened inside the walls of the quarantine zone. Just like the hotel, these apartments have been overrun by Zen foliage and are filled with people's belongings, abandoned in haste. In this area, the walls have been torn down, either by destructive portal storms or perhaps the Combine's cleanup effort. Barrels of fluid used by workers to try and treat or contain the Zen growth have been left behind, and it would appear that the cleanup efforts have either failed or been abandoned. By not explaining every facet of the world, we leave players with the opportunity to imagine for themselves the bigger picture of life in City 17.
Three cells left.
Oh, your dad's back.
Oh, thank God.
Russell! God damn, it's good to see you!
Likewise. Oh, this is great. Honestly, I'd pegged your survival at about 4%.
You can thank that Vortigern. He got me back here in one piece.
Russell, put Dad on.
Alex, baby!
Dad, we just took down a substation.
Good. Because when they move this thing, that weapon's gone. We need to get it tonight.
We will. You still got that data pod, right?
I do. Russ, this thing's bio-coded. I'm gonna need the TLI.
Yep, it's right over there.
Okay, great. You good, honey?
For sure. You go ahead. I'll be fine, Dad. I promise.
Keep that promise. I'll get to work on the data pod.
Once we had the spine of the game complete, teams went through the maps looking for additional opportunities to add the character and tone that players associate with the Half-Life games. This mannequin head grab was a fun opportunity to hit on the sci-fi horror B-movie vibe. We had a few conversations about how long to leave the head crab atop the mannequin, and decided that the experience should be analogous to catching a small dog in the middle of some mischief. We wanted players to feel like they had walked in on something they weren't supposed to see, and for them to go away feeling like every inch of the game contained something for them to find if they chose to explore it. After an early update to the headcrab sounds where details like breathing and grunting were added for the first time, we received feedback that the new sounds were too cute and familiar, moving the headcrab too far in the direction of a cuddly creature rather than an alien threat. We updated the sounds to be more threatening, but for this headcrab we brought back some of the cuter sounds to sell the headcrab's frustration with the mannequin.